This is a quick walkthrough of a Postman API governance collection. It's a proof of concept that I've been working on to demonstrate how Postman can be used to not just test APIs, but actually test for governance. So to kind of understand, the approach here, it helps to have a base understanding how Postman's used today. Here I have a workspace for a specific API. This is a reference implementation that we've developed. It's a products API. In this workspace, I have an open API definition that is defining this API. So I got a handful of paths and all defined as an open API 3. I've generated this collection from this, or a suite of collections, but one of those collections here is a contract test collection. And what this does is when you make calls to this, I'll switch to my mock server here. I'll get a list of products, but if I look at the test results here, I can see I'm running a handful of tests. Do I get a 200 status code back? Is there a body? Is it valid JSON? And then I'm actually using the JSON schema from that open API definition here. It's all the way at the bottom here to actually validate that the data being returned matches the contract. So this is a base set of contract tests that makes calls to the products API, and then uses scripts, test scripts to then test if we've met that contract. So that's pretty fundamental Postman API contract testing. Now, what I want to show you is how that same infrastructure can be used to not just test the API implementation, but actually test the design of the APIs to make sure it's following a handful of common rules that you want to make sure are in place for each API. So this is my products API workspace. I store my governance collection in a separate workspace. There's a governance one here. Here's my governance design collection at the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this to my my products workspace, because I'm just going to use it temporarily to govern this API. I don't need it always in the workspace. I can leave it there, but I can ultimately share it and use it in whatever workspaces and apply it to all of the APIs that I'm developing. So let me switch back to my products workspace. All right, now I should have a governance collection. Here we are. And because of how robust the API builder is, this open API has the possibility of having multiple schemas, having multiple versions. Actually getting access to this open API through the Postman API takes 4 separate API calls. So you have to pull a list of APIs. Oops, let me change my API key. So each of these collections require that your API has a governance environment. So let's actually use this one. So I have a governance environment for my product, as well as I have a mock and a production environment. So I can work on my dev environment, I can work on my production environment, and then I can apply the governance environment across all of them. So let's go ahead and pull a list of API, because this environment has my Postman API key in it. So which I have set here to be able to make calls to the Postman API. So I'm going to make a call, get a list of all the APIs. Here's all of the APIs that I want, and I can grab the ID for the one that I want to target, and then I'm going to pull a version of that single API here. I'm going to plug that key in here, and let's go ahead and run this, and I get the latest version. I've only got one version, but in practice you could have many versions. And then I'm going to grab this version ID here, and I'm going to pull that version. So here's my version ID as well as my API ID. And here's that version. And it actually gives me the schema ID right here. So I can take that schema ID now, and with an API ID and a version ID and a schema ID, I can get the entire open API that I want from this particular version. So here's my actual response. I have a schema of type OpenAPI 3, I have a YAML, and then here's my actual YAML one. Now I actually have what I need. But I'm going to store all three of these IDs now. All I'm doing is just writing them to the environment so that they're stored up here in my environment now, and I can use them across other API calls. So that's pretty verbose and complex to get, 4 API calls just to get your description. I've written an option 2 that does all that in one API call, so it just basically calls and gets a list of APIs, and you have to specify what the name of your workspace, the name of your API, and the version, and then it connects the dots and saves the same values in your environment. So now that I have those, I have access to my OpenAPI definition. Actually, let's leave it open here. I can start scrutinizing that. So does the name of the API meet requirements? So I'm going to just make a call to that. I've got my ID stored in my environment for the version and for the schema. So I should be able to just call this, and I get that whole OpenAPI back again. Now, well, all I do as part of test scripts is I parse that, and then I run a set of test scripts using the exact same infrastructure that I used to test my API implementation. But now I'm testing the design of the API. So I've put on three test scripts here that says, is the title greater than 5? Is the title less than 25? And then answering the ultimate question of, does this name meet our requirements, which require it be greater than 5 and less than 25. And so it actually stored this, the results of this question that I asked up here in the environment. And it can have multiple parts, but ultimately it stores, did it pass, yes or no. I can ask, does the description meet our requirements? So if I hit send on that, I can go to test results, and I can see it has a description, but this description is not greater than 100, but the description is less than 1,000. But ultimately, we did not pass this test. So all this is doing is just looking at the OpenAPI definition and saying, and looking at this and looking at this to understand what it's doing. And so most of these governance are just going to look at that. I can look at methods. I can look at the parameters and say all the parameters, are they using camel case? And it loops through. I've got a query. I've got a product ID and product ID across multiple paths and methods, and they're all using camel case. So ultimately answers my one question. I can do the same for descriptions, and then I can keep going. I can drill into responses and go, does do all the methods have a successful response? Yes. I can do all of my methods have a 500? No, none of them had a 500. So I failed this and failed for every endpoint. And so I can just keep doing, answering questions like this about specific things I want to know that can be defined by the OpenAPI. So this has quite a few that I just wanted, that are pretty common questions that get asked of API definitions, about the info, about the paths, and then I started pushing the boundaries here. If you look at this one, goes beyond just what's in the OpenAPI definition. I'm actually looking to make sure that we're using words in the design of the API. And so it actually loops through each path and said products is a word, and then products from this path is a word. So all the paths are using words, and this uses a dictionary, that's on GitHub. I think it's a GitHub gist maybe, that pulls that dictionary and makes sure that we're not using acronyms and other incoherent things as part of our API design. So this is me pushing the boundaries beyond just looking at Open API and the basic values. I'm bringing in other data and other things to help answer those questions. And so I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to, make more assumptions about, do all the verbs have resources? And I'm working my way into schemas to understand more about the properties for schemas. Do all the schemas have descriptions? But this provides a pretty base set of questions that groups will want to ask. So you need to be able to have it connected to your API to work, but it should, in theory, work across any valid Open API definition that you have. And as long as it can be pulled from the API, the Postman API, excuse me. So that's a quick look at how a governance collection can be applied. It's definitely a work in progress. The JavaScript is not always the most robust, well written. A lot of this can be condensed down into probably a library that would abstract away a lot of this duplication across scripts. So it's definitely going to need some script management. But for me, it goes beyond what JSON schema can do. It really speaks to using existing testing infrastructure, and it uses JavaScript with which developers are familiar with. So it really has the potential to create a set of common schemas or governance questions that can be asked. These can be published to the API network and as docs. And then people can download these, run these, reverse engineer, remix, rework these, answer questions exactly like they want. And then they can add their own, and they can start playing with other concepts. So going beyond what just Postman can define, but then being able to tailor governance to work exactly like you want it to work. Now I will end this with a look at the wider governance collections I'm building. There's a full API lifecycle one here where design is just one piece. We actually want to govern that teams have set up workspaces, have repos set up, and environments configured as expected. They're providing mock servers as well as development and production servers. They're governing, every API's got a plan, got a set of keys. And then I'm looking at, well, how do we govern testing and making sure that there's always contract testing, security testing, and performance testing in place. So this is meant to be a walkthrough of just the design governance and how it works, but this gives you a sneak peek into how wide governance can when it's applied to the full API lifecycle.